point how we end up in reading, and then
in the show.
continue the conversation.
Alrighty. Welcome to Grief Sesh. It's funny, at least for the posterity of the recording, that you have just arrived. You're on the show now, but you first your finger. I mean, it's not amusing, but it's like funny that, you know, whatever the temporal moment that is now involves you rebandaging your finger.
Yeah, that's experience.
Yeah, but you're good now.
Yeah.
Good.
Survive.
Yeah, survive, and the premise of survival. So interesting that our studio audience has met you before, but the theoretical recorded audience does not know who you are. You want to introduce yourself as yourself again?
Yeah. Hi, y'all. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, this place looks really cool. Studio building, and we coach like feels super fancy, like very cool style architecture. Interesting, hilly area, like houses in nearby area also like get try to mimic future style architecture. Well, so my name is Illia Yakovenko. I'm an artist from Ukraine and from Mariupol, from eastern part of Ukraine, and I also founder of Center for Art and Human Cooperation, which is a center that is working on building platforms for cultural exchange, solidarity, right, on international, cross-cultural, cross-communal kind of level. Yeah, it's very nice.
No, that's good. It's interesting. Also, I've heard you introduce yourself a lot, and it's gotten cleaner. Oh. And yeah, I mean, I think in addition, I mean, like clean. There's one, but also I think that knowing the work, and trying to understand it, that phrase me feels clear. You know.
Thank you.
And to that in particular, so before kind of inviting you to be on the show, part of it, well, I don't know if it was a cheat. I was like, I want to take the class failing. You're a social practice artist with fail. There you go. Gotta have the regalia. I can pause my thought. What is that?
Well, that's a necklace, traditional Ukrainian. They got here at one of Ukrainian events markets. From
Right.
a lady who said that they got it from someone from Ukraine, so they send it from Ukraine to here, and then all the money goes to the person in Ukraine.
Right. It's been pretty interesting, actually, how much, I mean, as someone, before I met you, I could honestly say I didn't know that I knew anyone who was Ukrainian, or like knew that I knew what Ukrainian culture was and looked like. So it's been interesting to me, you kind of coming into my life, and you being able to like get things like from Ukraine and from, you know, engage with Ukrainian communities. That's been interesting. But to that same sentiment again, what I was saying before, you know, I wanted to take a class sailing, and I know that you're doing a sailing project, and so I was like, so we can just do that. Like there's various ways to bring you in, often collaborating with Illia on different projects. But I also knew that this format existed, and I said I could bring you into this format, and that in my viewership of your work and practice, there is some component, there is a tie-in to the concepts of this show. But I didn't want to like force that on your work, to like make the assumption that because of the way that I'm interpreting it, it's linked to the kind of concepts that we're working with here. But you had responded that you did feel that there's some relationship there. Do you want to say more about that, or?
Yeah, sure. And you mean like the grief session?
A panel and workshop series about navigating grief.
Yeah.
At this point, all artists are guests involved in artists.
Yeah, so I guess when you mentioned that, I realized that in a way, my like Sea of Miracle project, in a way, also, it's also like a grief related thing, because like I grieve that my hometown in Ukraine got like, occupied and destroyed almost completely, and so I grieve about the loss of my home think, and the whole project is about like, dealing with this sort of like sense of displacement, sense of being lost, sense of grief. So it's also like a form of a grief. It's maybe like a different type of grief because it's not like grieving for an individual, like or some particular person, but it's rather or like, for something, for person or creature.
Which we've talked about on the show, especially when Shelby was here, that and even on our first show, someone was mentioning like grieving her marriage. You can like grieve the loss of something that's non
Yeah,
conscious.
yeah, and I think in a way I agree, like lots of the city of like tragedy of the of what happened, but also like most of my own sort of like sense of belonging. I think there's also like myself kind of, so it's like for the outside, but also
Sure.
me, like, toward the inside. So yeah, I think
That's
at
a
the whole,
specification that like, yes, you're grieving the loss of the thing that is external, but through this thing that is external, you're also having an internal experience, not just in correlation to that thing, but at least I'm interpreting that, not that I fully understand.
yeah, that's basically what I meant. And yeah, and so through this project, like try to in a way overcome this trauma and grief in some extent, to some extent, I guess, or cope with it, maybe not overcome, but cope with it, address it. That way, and with Sea of Miracle, for those who doesn't know, like people, it's like a series of events that are so like created to celebrate my hometown of Miracle in various ways, like let's say cooking food, or even like a sailing sessions where I invite folks to sail, and yeah, so it's just like we're reproducing sort of like cultural elements that are particular to the city where I'm from, and I try to kind of celebrate it and also create a connection between my experience there, my experience here, but also a lot of people like so we're inviting people to experience what they have experienced in America.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting because after, so the dream, the construct of this show has always been a class project, so it's in the history of the show. I'm breaking the fourth wall. But that dream would have been that we would have had this experience and then like the workshop portion meant sailing, right? And so there would be like more clarity. But we kind of like went the other way, which due to logistics, though today is a beautiful day. So, but Ilya is leaving for a cool project soon. Maybe we'll talk about that. But during, the moments where other people were sailing, we were talking about like sailing as art, how do those things overlap? And so you are saying that there, various aspects of cultural experience have been recently traumatizing through the war and other things, and that you're doing a project that is related to the culture of Marigold, that happens to be sailing, and that has therapeutic value too. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's basically what I guess I'm saying. Yeah, some form of therapy and meaningful kind of like something. Yeah, meaningful activity that helps me to
Sure. And it's interesting because I feel like we're working through this as a class. So I'm going to ask you a question. You don't have to already have had an answer, but you can like think through it. So you're sailing, you're an artist and you're sailing as art, and there's this reason that you're doing it. What is the participant viewer supposed to see as art or think as art, or
well, I think to me, I think
or do you be claiming as art?
yeah, I think mostly like the program or the project itself. So since it's like happening under the framework of an institution that or an organization that I created, Center for Corporation, right? So I think some activities that are happening within this framework, I claim them or frame them as art projects. And in a way, sailing is experiential kind of activity, and art is experiential, like more like even more conventional forms of art are also experiential kind of activities, like painting, like sculpture, performance. So some kind of experience essential kind of element is involved. And I guess with sailing, it's also an experience, it's also potential, but since it's also like folded into this wider framework of the Center for Academic Cooperation with all these references to Mariupol, and it has like real like, conceptual framework, so it's not just like a random activity. The activity is tied to my kind of cultural knowledge and the kind of experience. So I guess when it gets folded into this framework, I see it as art. And sailing in particular can be also then considered as part of this art activity, and I guess to some degree art. But I guess for me, what matters is not like to say that, oh no, sailing is art. Now we argue about it. Oh, it's art. We think it's art. No, it's not. And then I would have to do that. Convince someone that, oh no, that's art. I guess for me, it's more important that this experience is meaningful. So it has like, yeah, and that affects people. And yeah, that's what's the priority, rather than just going something we're excited what it's excited about.
Sure. I'm having a lot of thoughts. Partially because we as a group have conversations, so I'm thinking about things around like, in a way, like sailing is like a craft or like a process, or what would you say, like
It's an art.
sure, yeah, you know, but it's
Yeah,
like,
so,
it's exactly the practice of sailing, and then, but like normally it is not art. But you know, like whatever, and so this is kind of the question is you know, you're using these different, so I guess the other thing I was gonna say is, so there's this layering, so it's like Maripol, the foundation, the Center for Art and Human Cooperation, the different cultural layers, the art of sailing, and these things create an experience that by looking at the different layers and nuances and the conceptual connections, the things are connected. It's not like a random choice. That experiential moment can be considered as art. And I'm assuming that you feel like sometimes you're operating in and out of the capital A art world. Is that true?
Can you elaborate? I'm not sure.
Sure. I mean, the art world is a phrase that people use, but I think it's like there's more than one thing that the art world encompasses. You know, we're at a school that's a liberal arts college, but we're in an art building. Like, is this a part of the art world or not? You know,
No.
but yeah, like I'm inferring, I guess, or I'm inquiring more than I'm inferring, that you are related to the art world in some way.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Willingly or unwillingly, I'm almost got my MFA in art social practice.
We'll see.
So, well,
I'm kidding. I'm on Illia's graduate.
so I guess I am
Yeah,
the other one that we're not.
sure. You're immersed. You're immersed. And so these practices, you're like sailing, cooking, playing games sometimes, those things may not be normally a part of the art world. And, you know, is even interesting. It sounds like you're saying you may not even be that interested in being related to the art world.
Well, I guess you're right, but also I just, since the boys are begun, I think about things like that less, and I think about more like something like making stuff or doing something meaningful, creating something meaningful that can be meaningful in terms of like me or like self-care, kind of joyful for myself, but also that can be meaningful, like sharing the culture, like spreading the information, and also trying to find ways how to support people who fight from Ukraine. I guess that's the priority right now.
Right.
And so like thinking about artwork, world and stuff like that, I guess it's now and like that would be something that I think of too much. Yeah, so I just try to use my creative kind of potential as a human being, but also like some type of training that I have gotten already, some type of experience that I've gotten already in art specifically, and just like trying to use my creativity as a human being to kind of create these experiences and this kind of like meaningful art things, but I don't think about art world. So it's like, yeah, I think it's not a priority.
Sure. Is there ever in that, like, which I think I understand, so to not try to paraphrase, do you identify as an artist or that you're doing art regardless?
Yes.
Of, yeah.
Yes,
So that's important.
yes,
In fact, the Center for Art and Human Cooperation, and even the way you described it at the beginning, like through art, like all the, I want to create connection, all
Yeah.
this stuff like through art.
all essentially art and creativity based practices.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of layers there, but I want to move through and maybe we'll reference back. But one of the things that really interests me is like, you're like, I want to be creative. I'm like taking care of myself. I'm interested in meaning. So like, those are other layers because we're like sailing and like whatever. But now you're talking about like meaningful and like self-restorative and like these other layers. It's definitely art. So it's really kind of getting sandwiched together. But at the same time, you're like, I don't care who's the sandwich. I just want it to be beautiful. You know, it doesn't need to be the art world. It could be Mary Sue. It could be someone from Ukraine or it could be someone from Uganda. So, and to bring it home and not too far away, part of what's informing that choice, the way you feel in the present, is like navigating grief. But at the same time, the work is not about grief. And at the same time, it is supporting your navigation of grief, and like then you have like the support people in Ukraine, like all these things. The work that you're doing is actually serving a purpose in your like complete neglect of like the systems that analyze it, but like forging forward words towards purpose. And so one of the things that you have and continue, you were before and are continually using in this chorus of art making and non-art activities that are claiming as art, the creation of food is one of them. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I guess food is a very nice thing. Yeah, and definitely it kind of like bears within it like a lot of cultural meaning. It's like a product of like generations of kind of like people and cultural specificity of the place and the geography and like many other different political kind of factors, and even like geopolitical factors. But it's also at the same time very like essential for us humans, like people eat to kind of replenish their like energy, but also it's a very like communal kind of process. So in guess many cultures, in Ukrainian culture for sure, but it's like experiencing other cultures as well. Where I meet people through the world, it's like for most some kind of communal experience of having food is important. So I feel like yeah, it's just a good way of sharing culture and provide like through experience again. Like and it's in a way almost like, and there is some condition, but also I feel like it's almost like preconditional, like in a way, it's just like can't even work politics, for example. So you can like set up a dinner thing and not really like an experience things and share culture. But it's like, I mean, I guess you can bring up particular political things like that are connected to you will, but you can also like stay away and then just like kind of have this common experience and then some form of like insight into each other's cultures or something you can kind of exchange. Which I think it's cool.
Yeah.
It's just, there's something about that.
I do think that's an interesting distinction that I don't know that I've thought about with a lot of intention. There's two other projects. One is called Enemy Kitchen, which I think is a Michael Rakowitz project, and then the other one is Conflict Kitchen, which is a different artist or artist groups project, and there's a dispute over that novel. Just who did it first or whatever, or it's a ripoff. But Enemy Kitchen was like a little food cart pop-up where they would only serve food with countries that the US was in conflict with. And then Conflict Kitchen, they would like go to a place and then like do stuff with them and get recipes and come back. And it was way more like almost like Paradox Cafe, like it was on like a college campus or near, and like it had like people working there and like branding. So those are two art projects, but both of them were kind of, I think Enemy Kitchen was more conceptually about like animateness. And then Conflict Kitchen in its kind of like branding, they like the menu, like little paper menu thing, like had information and interviews, and I think they would hand over their Instagram or something, and someone in the other country like posting stuff. But you're right, those were like very much kind of like about political conflict, and I think even my own work. And if when you were describing this, and I was thinking through the thought, there's always this kind of like American like joke about like going home for Thanksgiving, and then like because it's near election season, like people are talking about politics, and it's like frustrating because you might go home to where there's like conservative or whatever. And so there is that other layer of talking about politics while eating. But I do a lot of work with food, and I was not again funnily teasing this apart so specifically. A lot of my work is just about the gathering and the feeling good and making that gathering happen. But as I think about this further, I just did an event about food where there was a political undertone. What I wasn't thinking about it, but it was just present in the group.
Yeah, and I guess like, my comment is like, because most of the things that I'm doing is also like has a political undertone to them for sure, but still it's like, since essentially like there's this gathering and like sharing culture, I guess it's then easier to bring in some political things because then people like are willing to kind of talk about them, because then they have this initial connection to food, sort of like they feel like warm up to each other or something. I don't know.
Sure.
Just feel them actually this ingredient, it's like it comes from there, and that's connected to the scientific kind of bloody history or whatever. So
Right.
kind of always kind of like
Which is, there's two things. One is logistical and the other is conceptual. When you were talking about, I love that you said this, and I will see how much I never remember things to use them later, but it happened just now. Where you were describing that, I really love the language you were using. You said, I think you said sensory, like a sensory based experience, and that even looking at a painting is a sensory experience as much as sailing a boat or eating food. And so that's similar to a painting that's conceptual or political cartoon or something. There is this like meaning. And so what I'm sitting with in this conversation is you've made analogous like a painting having some sort of conceptual meaning and being able to convey that to the viewer, and having any activity have some sort of conceptual intention and convey that in some way to the viewer, and they're like parallel. Art and intention, art output, totally different styles. The other logistical question is, you can let me know when the appropriate time to share the communal experience of consuming food is relevant here,
yeah,
and whether you want to talk about it,
yeah,
whatever you want
right now,
right now.
actually, and I can also like say a few words about words.
Facilitate.
So I guess like first I was like a little bit overwhelmed with things, and I was like, oh, I don't really have time to cook stuff. But then she saw the poster, and then I realized like, oh, there's like a toast on the poster. And so then I sort of remembered that borscht is also like part of like, it's also like a dish or a soup that people in Ukraine use like for ritual, like when someone dies. And I guess that I think like there's like some regional variations and stuff, so I don't know like really a lot of particularities about like how many days and things like that, but basically part of grief, sorry, the process of someone who that is to have a soup together with other people on specific portions. So yeah, so I felt like, oh well, that's feels like celebrating life with my host, I guess.
Yeah.
So like making the soup. So I felt just like, okay, it feels good. And again, like I just found for myself a meaningful way to sort of like motivate myself to make the soup, but also like to feel good about doing the soup. So it just felt like really nice.
Yeah.
Again, for myself, it was like again like a joyful experience, like navigating some kind of like grief that I guess also have like, but also yeah. So it's super important.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that, and it's interesting. Yeah, just one of the ways that I started making work about food was like I was actually post a student, but I was in like a collegiate environment, and like people were like in the studios working, and so I would like make soup and bring it to the studio. And it was the kind of conceptual intention I had was to like nourish the consumer. It's like, oh, you could look at this painting, be like, you could eat this soup, you know, and so that has always been like an underlying characteristic of my work with food, is that it's like actually nourishing the participant. And that whatever they go on to do after that is kind of like been infused with like the energy that I'm giving. But also something that's kind of like in my life right now is like working with so many students that a lot of people are like, I'm stressed and anxiety, like this class, like all this stuff. And like nourishment is like a balm to that. And then also thinking about grief and like overwhelm and anxiety and this feeling of like not doing things as a way of like saving your energy. But when the things are wrapped together, like, oh, Matoska and the borscht and the cultural thing, and it's all fitting together, it actually feels nourishing to do the thing.
Yeah.
So I turned the heat on 5 and I don't want it to burn. So let's go over there and stir it so it doesn't burn.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, let's just get these guys to play.
Yeah. We'll do it.
Where's the
Over in this corner. I'll bring it. Make sure it's not burned on the bottom. So show us how to do it. Yeah, you can. It's gonna be hot, guys. It's gonna be hot.
well, I guess it's super easy.
Yeah.
Well, I can even like serve it. It's more like when
I love it. I'm recording, so.
um
If you need any help, these are all trained social practice
okay.
helper artists. Emma, we're sorry you missed this.
So basically we have the base, the soup, then the garnishes and the sour cream, and then the bread, which is a collaboration.
So good.
It's what?
It smells so good.
Oh, thank you. And well, I guess it's easier if I just like hand over the soup, and then folks can garnish it whatever way they'd like. So there's no like mandatory things. You can decide whether you want sour cream or whether you want like, other things. So who's first?
Get that board. Get that board.
Oh yeah, so sorry, I didn't know. So it's vegan, first of all. It's onions, carrots, tomatoes, potatoes, beans, like kidney beans. What else? Some dill. Beets, the beets. Yeah, the beets are important.
Sure you forgot the beets?
No, you can't forget. But I forgot potatoes yesterday.
Oh, no.
But they're in there.
How many times have you made this?
The soup? Oh, I guess hundreds of times.
Hundreds.
Well, maybe not hundreds, but a lot, many times.
Sure.
Well, I really don't. It's like a mixture of recipes. But what I try to nail, it's taste that I can like recognize from my childhood. And we had this conversation with Michael yesterday because he said like, "Oh, your borscht like feels different than your previous borscht," and I was like, "Well, it's okay. There's like some variation ability like possible." And then Michael was like, "Oh, but some people try to make it intentionally, like cook intentional things like super intentional." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm also trying to cook it intentional. It's just like there's still like some room for difference." But at the same time, I remember, so there was that time when I kind of like cooked the borscht, but using everything like the produce from a regular grocery store. because I didn't have time, and so I sound like just bring me tomatoes and all the stuff, and so we cooked the borscht, and it just turned out completely like tasting like super different, and I didn't like it at all. And I was like, yeah, because there is like, and I guess the borscht wasn't bad, it's just like wasn't like the tastes were different. It wasn't like super recognizable. From kind of Eastern European, I guess, like former Soviet, like grocery stores. And it's interesting because like things are kind of the same, but they also like, yeah, it changes the profile. I don't know why and how, and you know, this is just a carrot, this is just a tomato, but it tastes different. So
Yeah, that's
I get this part is super intentional.
sure. That's a super interesting. I wasn't thinking about that because you do like the Russian grocery it's nearer to our house. It's in Southeast, but it's definitely not nearer than several other grocery stores. And Ilya always goes for potatoes and carrots. And I'm like, I mean, you know, there's other reasons to go, including usually get some, like the sour cream is very specifically different.
Yeah.
But it seems like even the beets are different. Who's next? Get that soup, baby. So is borscht a soup? Or is borscht borscht?
That's like if saying is art or saying is art.
What is what is soup in Ukrainian?
I mean, I consider it's a soup, but I also don't know.
What is
I
the
think
word
there
for
is a-
soup?
I just soup.
Soup is a Ukrainian word.
Yes, I don't think it's Ukrainian. I think it's just
Sure.
maybe it's French or
Interesting.
German or something, and then everyone uses it.
So do people say borscht soup?
Well, normally just say borscht, but
Sure.
they can also consider it a soup. But I guess there is a conversation with a borscht is soup. I mean, that's a real conversation.
Yeah.
Someone would be like, no, it's not a soup. It's just
Borscht.
something. It's all unique thing. But I guess you can. I mean, there may be some meaningful argument about this question. So
I love it.
I'm not super invested. So, you know.
Can you squeeze that?
This is
Looks like soup.
Is someone waiting on a borscht?
I think everyone has.
Are you
Okay.
eating borscht?
Yeah, are you?
Yes. We will go back. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So is there like a specific time when people make borscht or?
Yeah, they're like different holidays and different like things. Like I know what you call it in English, but they're like some like when someone dies, there are like some number of days after which like people gather and like mourn. Yeah, sort of like mourning kind of thing. And then there's also like yearly thing when people every year like I guess celebrate or remember folks who kind of died, and they also can give watch for these kind of types things.
So it's particularly those things.
No, not necessarily. It can be also like other celebration, like holidays and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily like grief or mourning related, but it's yeah, various occasions, I guess, but various like symbolically meaningful occasions,
Interesting.
or spiritually meaningful or culturally meaningful.
Beef Sesh, sponsored by Bread Club. Unofficial Bread Club.
I don't think it like has.
Who's what? No, it doesn't.
I don't think it had like that. Sourdough bread happens the lockdown.
So we were making bread.
Lockdown. Yeah. they were-
Yeah.
Oh, nice. My first.
Is borscht traditional eaten with anything else?
Yeah, there are like different things. One pretty common thing is you bake special like bread puffs. They're like very garlic infused kind of
Wood infused?
garlic.
Mm.
So they're very garlicky.
So there's no garlic in borscht.
There is some,
Oh, okay.
but I guess it depends. Maybe some people put less garlic, but then they use this bread puffs or whatever.
Any spices?
What?
Any spices besides salt?
I use black pepper. I guess depends on regional taste.
So, yeah, what ways have you used borscht as an art before?
Well, I guess in a couple of circumstances. One of the most recent ones was part of the savory program when yeah, I cooked like borscht and derumni, which is another Ukrainian and Russian dish that was common in my family and was kind of like a fundraiser. What
dish?
Derumni, like the potato kind of pancake dish. It similar to latkes, I guess, latkes. Maybe essentially, yeah. I mean, they're not. I mean, even like the way they cook it, they're different. But they're also similar. Yeah. So there's that. And it was like a fundraiser kind of thing where we stop at a restaurant, like at a Mexican restaurant, but they can like provide the kitchen. So and I got the ingredients when they were like the day when they were up. They were closed, so then I cooked the stuff. Advertised the fundraiser. People came in, and yeah, so we brought the borscht and stuff. Reason like, yeah,
What would you say, like, what made it different? Than just a fun, like. For your benefit of understanding, I'm not interrogating your work, but I'm asking you certain kinds of questions. If the context of this show is a class, so teaching through your experiences, which is to say, what makes. So you described it was at a restaurant, you got the ingredients, and it was a fundraiser. What made it more than a fundraiser or art fundraiser or art and not just fundraiser or not just a day of the restaurant being?
well, I think like there's definitely like some conceptual framework that comes with the with the fact that this was part of the Miracle program. So the idea is again like yeah, the layers, right? Spread the information about Miracle and about, and I guess my ideal sort of scenario where we can like maybe reach out to other families and ask them for recipes and kind of like then start cooking food from these other families and people. Yeah, to just like share different cultures and experiences and foods that people used to eat or yeah, used to eat in Mariupol. Because like yeah, I guess like again like I like some diversity that exists in the area. Like yeah, people historically coming like from different places like Armenians, Jewish people, Tatar, like Greeks, Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians. So there's like definitely like a level of regional kind of diversity in this area. A lot of influences like from Russia and the European, also like Ottoman with the foods. But that's the ideal scenario. I mean, it's like a framework, it already exists in the publication, but by now I only kind of push like something that's connected to my family more. But yeah, so layers. And then another thing is that again, like just moving through this world like as an artist. There's something to say because like in some way like when I was planning out the event, I was like, oh, okay, so I have this handouts, I will have this other things like art things that can supplement, can extend the experience beyond just eating borscht. But I just didn't have time to do all that. So it was borscht and fundraiser and the thing. So I'm not sure if it answers the question or not. Definitely, like sometimes intentions are bigger than sometimes you can actually do up a certain limited amount of time. And I guess there's definitely was more possibilities to make this whole thing more like clear art than actually happened.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, this was, I think it's due to the semi-formal nature of this show, but Ilya and I share a kitchen, so I've been sitting on this response. But, I mean, I've gently referenced it, but I feel like it's not uncommon that your work, while you're making it, you will have some sort of vision that you may be like near or far from, but then there's also like that whatever you've done is a springboard for something else that may or may not happen. And I think in your lecture, you really skillfully tied it all together in a way where none of the loose ends were visible. You know, you're like, I was here, I did this, I was here, I did this, it's linked to this other time. And so it does resolve. It resolved it in that form. That was almost the first time that it felt the most kind of streamlined and coherent. And so the other thing I was thinking is, did the absence of those things, I mean, well, it's sort of a question and a statement. You said you're like, oh, I could have done more, it could have been more clear, but you did claim it in your graduate presentation as like artwork you did. So did the lack of the things that you had thought like disqualify it, or did you, yeah?
No, I don't think so. It just depends like what's the goal of the or intention when they're gonna like make the project. And I guess if like one of my intentions was to share as much culture as I could, even like more elements, like let's say, oh, there is this small like culture, or there is like an printout, and then maybe like some information like a postcard or something, because then people can like take both, let's say, for example, besides just eating borscht, but also like
Right,
having
take
these
away.
other elements, yeah, or like shorts or something like that. I guess it could have kind of like yeah, maybe actually like exchange thing.
So
Was
the
your own experience kind of like more like divided? Yeah, so I guess that's the only. So it's not like about claiming something as art, because you can claim potentially like whatever you want as an art thing. Like even this, I mean this this
This is art, baby.
Yeah. So what even like
This
I can
was,
also
this was an art that I took out of the garbage
right.
and reappropriated.
But also
as art.
even I can like be like, oh, now we have this image, and then send my portfolio. So even
Sure.
the borscht and indirection can be like
Right.
name design. Yeah, I mean, but basically everything. But yes, what's important is like what's your real intention when you work on your project,
Right.
whether it meets the intention. If that's priority.
So to summarize, set goals that are achievable and plan in order to achieve those goals.
Huh.
Just use your smell, taste, memory and lock it in. If you ever forget, you just go get yourself a bowl of work. Good. Have you learned anything about trying to do events and engage the community? Which is for those of you, so Ilya kind of temporarily immigrated here 3-ish years ago. And had no frame of reference for Portland, and then the pandemic hit. So has been trying to connect with communities, but in a peculiar environment. Have you learned anything about trying to do that?
Well, I think. Definitely. Like, learn that sometimes expectations are not. Or it's maybe not necessary, like sometimes you expect things, but then they go. Completely different way. You can also like expect things from people or think about someone in certain way. So you have like these pre-existing notions or things like, but then when you actually meet or when you do a thing, it's completely like different. So it's not something that you expect it to be. So I guess yeah, even like especially when it comes to people, that's for sure like don't have like any pre-existing expectations, both in good and bad way. I think.
So you're sort of saying like, don't project
Yeah,
or assume about the group you're engaging, but also. Don't try to know what's gonna happen.
yeah. So both things, I guess, like one thing like project and like the work. So yeah, don't project about people, but also don't project about the thing itself, because sometimes you can like try to plan it out the best way you can, but then it's not always to work out the way you kind of imagined it. But also I think like embracing this moment is also important. It's just like letting go and maybe like next time so that changing certain things, but sometimes like the surprise is actually good, so you learn more. So because like this unexpected element, it's actually making the event richer in some ways, because then people kind of like more organic, like the participant, the people who engage, they say like, yeah, the whole thing becomes like more organic because people are just who they are and not what you expect them to do or what you expect them to do.
Do you have a memorable instance where such a thing?
That's a good question. Sorry. Let me scroll. Wait, what time is it?
3:05.
Okay. Memorable instance. Well, I think just in general, like when I blend out, like when I blend out the thing at Mr. Cone's borscht or other things at the same club. Yeah, it felt like, and I guess this is something that they oftentimes do. I try to like imagine things in a certain way and then like try to pull it off in this same particular way and be like, oh, this must be this way and this must be this way. But then when it comes to the whole event, like when people kind of like step in, they just do things. I mean, I don't know, like
You can't have
I can
control.
like, yeah, I can have control basically, but at the same time, it's very helpful. It's helpful because like let's say, like printing out stickers or putting the stickers on the boat. Like let's say even like with the stickers, it's also like part of the whole experience. Like when we were part of the Sea of Mariupol, or setting Mariupol thing was we show up naming the boat, and part of the we show was putting stickers on the boat, and just felt like so organically like better to hand stickers over to people and just like give them control of where they want to put the stickers, kind of like rather than design the boat and then put them on the boat the way you want them to be. Does it make sense? Because like,
But didn't you try to control where the stickers went?
no. I mean, there was like a recommendation, but I told like you can put them wherever.
I mean, I don't-
there's one seagull like that's
Oh, I
makes it
remember
like
that.
some other way around. It's like I was like, okay, it looks funny. I guess like people, I don't know why. And I guess since like sticker, like the size of the stickers, and then there's like the boat design, felt like yeah, there's like that's probably like good because they were designed for a specific place, but also like based on the boat design. So I guess it was like intuitively clear that oh, the stickers goes here, the stickers goes here, this here, this turn. Yeah, I think it was like a balance between like freedom the stickers where people want it.
So that's an example of the organic. Which it comes. I mean, I could have made assumptions, but I wasn't really thinking about that. But now that you said this, I actually noticed this during your graduate presentation. So I went to Ilya's graduate presentation and it was really quite wonderful. He did the event in collaboration with the Fulbright program. And so they were like co-hosting the event, which was like amazing because then Ilya had like a host and people were like saying and doing stuff. Gave his presentation. But one of the hosts, it was so interesting. And I think at the end of the presentation, there was like an opportunity for questions. But I made reference to this in my comment about how it was really wonderful. Ilya setting out to create this cross-cultural exchange. And by engaging the Fulbright community, he had people from like all over the world like at his event. And some of the things I'm now saying is sort of what they were saying, but also even created like is a part of the Fulbright community. So Ilya came on Fulbright and everyone was really impressed. It was like, oh, this is my culture. Like they don't really know that he's an artist or like, it's like, I'm an artist, it's my grad thing. And they're just like, whoa, this is Ukrainian stuff. And they're kind of like getting indoctrinated in the community. There was borscht, other people brought different meals. There was like Korean food and all this stuff. And one of the hosts, they were like, okay, now, they were like, does anyone have questions? And then they were like, okay, now everyone's gonna say something. And they're like, starting with the last letter of the first letter of your nation, country. And then, and everyone said something. And everyone said something really interesting, they introduced themselves, and they said, this is where I'm from in the country, and this is how this impacted me. And it was just like, it's that moment which I think sometimes projects are lacking, where like you're not doing anything. Like you really like let go of the wheel, and what's happening is really wonderful, and the people who are present are having a really rich experience, and the experience they're having is very in tune with the experience you are trying to create.
Yeah, I think it's good that you can remember this moment and put it up because, yeah, I feel like in a way, if it was like me who was kind of like organizing all this, like for me, it's hard to imagine like, hey, now everyone don't think, but then since like the person took over, it felt like still felt good,
Sure.
It's like, yeah, it's maybe a little bit different than I would normally
Yeah.
do that, but it's also like, well, it's happening, everyone saying things, people feel good about whatever is happening. So, and it's also felt like very supportive, like because I was tired and burned out because of the whole stuff.
Sure.
The event and the presentation stuff. So yeah, my presentation was like it's actually hilarious. Like the fonts were different, like in slides, because I was just like, yeah, yeah.
I mean, my graduate presentation, I was trying to get a suit tailored because it was on Zoom. And I was like, had this like quick change where I like became Blackula. And I needed like a suit. And I got these like patches of African fabric put on them. And the tailor didn't have them ready. So like the day before, he's like, oh, I forgot. So I was like, I pick it up in the morning. And I like went and like he was like working on it. And I was like, I think I gotta go. He's like, no, it's almost done. And then I got it. And then I was driving. And it's the first time this ever happened to me, but the bridge was up.
Oh.
And so I was like waiting for the bridge and I called Kirk and I was like, can you start Zoom for me? So yeah, and then when I was doing the presentation, I was like, oh, this is an unfinished presentation, whatever. But yeah, so I can identify.
Yeah, so I guess having that and just relying on people in some way, like for letting it go, if someone to like steer the whole thing can be really good.
I mean, it's interesting, it's collaborative. It frees up like burden from your admin brain. And it also, in the spirit of your project, Center for Art and Human Cooperation, like you're trying to create intercultural, international, collaborative projects. It's just occurring to me in this moment, but that's what happens when you like continue to ruminate about an artwork. Is it's like truly all of those layers. Like if someone's like, what's this art? Like we got together, we talked, we looked at a presentation, we went sailing. Was there any art? But if people are cooperating, like if the only project was the Center for Art and Human Cooperation and its goal was to create cooperative exchange between people, that was happening.
Yeah, that's the thing, that's intentional again. Like if there's have an intention to like create some form of, or share my culture knowledge, but also like have some form of collaboration between people. I mean, maybe it's not like, maybe like more like like in the moment, maybe it's not like super long term, but still I guess kind of ground for maybe some long term things possible. Yeah, we can like do it. But basically, what I'm just trying to say that it doesn't matter for me whether people thought that whatever thing was art or not.
Sure.
What mattered to me is that people enjoyed it. There was this element of joy, and like people experienced saying, and they also had this meaningful reference to whatever framework that I kind of brought up, like the Mariupol and to, so they also connected these things together. And then doesn't matter to me whether participants or people who were there like felt that this is a nice project or not. It doesn't. It's not even like a question. It's like doesn't matter. I guess it matters to me to name it art at the point when I kind of package it to the like, tertiary identity. Because then, as an artist, you're like, oh, I'm an artist, and then I need to like present this thing as an art, like in the publication stuff, so people then read it, and then they, oh, that makes sense. That all experience crafted was like me as a professional artist crafting this thing as a professional, and this is why really like I can be. I don't know, commission more work, get hired, or if you really do something like that, or maybe get more money to actually invest more money in community projects like that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's a helpful distinction as we unpack that as a class or a part of the kind of content of the course. I definitely, I mean, as Master as Mike Junior, I definitely am like sitting in that container, but when I'm doing a lot of my work, similar, I guess it's similar, like there's a certain world in which I'm packaging my work as art, but when I'm considering doing an activity, it is about the goals and objectives that are, you know, there. And sometimes it's just to learn, and it's almost just being clear about what my goals and objectives are, what kind of dictates the event. What I know you're traveling soon. What project are you working on? How can you talk about that?
So I'm going to DC in 2 days, I guess. It's the other day.
That sailing in. We did it. And the borscht. Ilya, you feel free to leave but stay.
Yeah, and that's like a project which is, well, I guess I don't really know how I feel about it right now, but
Sure.
basically just to say in a few words is that
You were thinking about this premise years ago. When
Yeah.
we first met, our first conversation was about this.
yeah, so there was this artist, his name is Victor Arnaudov, and he sort of like from my hometown, from Mariupol, but he's also like famous American artist. And the story is like long, but to cut it short, it's like there is like communist revolution in Russian Empire, and then he flees to China, and then after that he flees to the Bay Area, and he graduates from College of California College of Arts or something. Now it's even closed down. So he graduates, he goes to Mexico, he works with the Diego Rivera. He becomes like really invested into like mural art. So then he comes back to the Bay Area, and he makes like all these murals in the Bay Area. And then in the 1960s, he decides to go back to the Soviet Union. So he comes back to our hometown, I guess. Then he creates like mosaics, like also like monumental mosaics and some buildings in the city. I mean, he created like 3 mosaics.
Is that sequel?
No, Seagull is not here. His mosaics are more like communist, or like straightforward, like because he then became, like,
Pro-communism?
yeah, he became a communist. And he came back, and so it's very like, yeah, it's very, you know, they're like mostly people. They're all like have like very kind of communist kind of. So like this thing, like this images or the imaginary or these symbols are mostly communist symbols that very confused heroes. and that's another question of the whole research and stuff, like how do you like do these projects now? Because of the war and stuff like that.
You're saying, I mean, not that I'm confused about, but I'm just to clarify, you're saying that because of the war, it makes doing this project peculiar?
Yeah, because like he was super pro, kind of like communist.
I see.
I mean, then I also read his autobiography, and he was like getting at like some Ukrainian artists, because monumental artists specifically, because there was like this whole thing in the 60s when monumental artists, because like all art was controlled, right? And especially like paintings, because like if you painting, like if you do a painting, it's like always social realist kind of painting, which means like you need to like make the painting in a certain way that glorifies the party or like the culture of the Soviet Union. And it was like super strictly controlled. But with the monumental art, because get the layer of like aesthetic abstraction, because it's like monumental, right? It can be like, oh, there's a pattern, or there's like more like abstract kind of things. Then artists would be like, oh, so if there's a pattern, I can actually use Ukrainian like ornament or something traditional. And so through this monumental art, many artists back in the 60s, they tried to actually introduce more like kind of Ukrainian traditional elements into the art. And this guy, he was like, his autobiography, like taking it down. He was like, no, monumental art, not supposed to do that. You're like smuggling whatever nationalist kind of ideology or something. Which is like, it's complicated. So it's like, he's like a very, I mean, in the United States, he's like very complicated figure, because there was this huge scandal around the mural at Washington School. So WPA, like Work Progress Administration, back in 2030s, commissioned mural. I guess maybe they built the school back at the time, and also commissioned the mural. And then the guy would go and he was like, oh, okay, so I'll make them like it's Washington School, right? So he would paint Washington. But then instead of like glorifying him as founding father, feel like critical, right? Because he's already a communist, he's like left, and so he would like criticize whatever Washington, the founding father narrative. So he had like Washington, and then Washington like shows west, and then pioneers go west, and then they're like dead, like indigenous people just blacking their food, and then they're like back to the Washington, they're like slaves digging like making cotton and stuff. So I guess back then it was already like super resonant, but then after
It was
like
destroyed or not?
no, it wasn't.
It's still
There, but then there was like thing, I guess.
it's an elementary school.
I guess it's a high school.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there was this conversation during the 60s or 70s when like I guess someone brought this up, that actually it's like not good that people portrayed in this kind of victim kind of ways. And so I guess first like yeah, I don't know like who brought this up, but I know that the conversation went like that, and NAACP stepped in, and then the whole thing was like, do we destroy it or not? And then eventually they landed that they invited like people from community, from specific like community, to supplement murals. So they would like put murals, like other murals on the opposite wall with like people of color kind of like emancipating, like so like empowered, right? Like this kind of image is not like only being like oppressed, but also like being empowered, like to liberation, emancipation. So all this happened, and they kept the mural, original art of the mural, and then this newer mural. But then I guess just 2019 or something, new conversation like scandal kind of broke out. And yeah, and then again, like people were like, we should tear it down because like there's like the indigenous people, and then people from community in school can be like too traumatized and stuff like that. And also like the way he kind of portrayed them was like super, just like a generic kind of indigenous person. Yeah, sort of like with feathers and stuff, but it's not like even from this region or anything like that. Or from that, so it still was like kind of like weird. So yeah, so it's like problematic, and he was like so he's problematic both in Ukraine, in the United States, but he's also like, yeah, I don't know, it's just interesting to kind of
complicated figure.
Yeah, it's a complicated figure.
I mean, I think it's, as I was saying to you yesterday, that it's an interesting time to be delving into these things, informed by the times that we live in. So you'll obviously start your process and see what happens, but I mean, I think also your project. The Center for Art and Human Cooperation, it's like, I mean, we have problematic figures in our world. And in fact, there's transformative justice culture exists, but wholesalely, actually, a lot of problematic justification, in fact, making it contemporary to this temporal moment. My friend collaborator Blue was in this room as a guest artist yesterday, and then he later went to a part of a process that sometime this month, I guess, they're deciding whether or not to make non-unanimous jury decisions retroactively expunged, which to spare like a much longer, essentially Oregon and Louisiana were the two states that allowed for non-unanimous jury convictions. So you only needed 10 instead of 12 jurors to say that someone was guilty. So these things are like still happening today. And your project is interested in like engaging problematic stuff and casting some sort of,
Yeah, I guess.
so well complex, it just feels like it fits, whether it's not right for you today or not, who knows, but.
Yeah. Hope I can emotionally
Sure. Yeah,
manage it.
sure. But take your time. I mean, and that's the other thing I was gonna say is like, it's interesting what you were talking about with the traumatic depictions. And I allow myself to go on a thought experiment with that as well, but in context of this moment and project and talk show, I think we did some service around work that is like informed by trauma and is trauma informed, and that the work that is a result is actually like enjoyable and nourishing, and it is not disassociated from the thing that's challenging, but it is a way of like holding it in a way that's like gonna work for us as makers, if not.
Yeah, and I guess this is what I'm doing with the whole savory bowl. Just, yeah, it's strongly informed, but it's like definitely not to depict like traumatic things and reinforce it, but rather like to find ways how to find like inner peace or something, overcome it maybe to some extent. But it is not to be like the how would you say but it can't like move like dysfunctional. So not to find it because like sometimes when trauma is super intense, like you're just dysfunctional, I can't like really do anything. When at least like through my projects, I try to like get over. Maybe I can like resolve the trauma, but at least I can like make something that makes me functional. Like, so I feel like, oh, okay, so it helps me to deal with it or to cope with it instead of like the function. Nothing forces the full experience.
I love that. Do you have, I felt like that was a nice close. Do you have questions of the class?
Questions?
For them?
Oh. Maybe like what's your personal strategies to cope with difficult experiences that you encounter in your life?
Art. Yeah, I would say also art. It's just, it can get very like lost in it, can be distracted in a way that's not like ignoring things, but more like forming them into things. Let's say humor or maybe not the best one, it's like what ignoring. Or sort of not like religiously journaling, like I don't know, once a month, what's coming on, just like write whatever.
I like to go into the forest. That usually helps me.
Is that a complete sentence?
I like writing. Generally, I like sci-fi for envisioning a better future and horror stories to make some use of my nightmare ideas. So that's it kind of transforms it into a better thing, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think like there's definitely some thread with, some traumatic experiences, like try to like creatively kind of process them, like process them in some way. So, yeah, I guess that's one of my strategies as well. Because otherwise, it's like, yeah, like different self-care things, but also like the therapy or like seeing kind of therapist. But it's like it's gonna say that it's kind of like feels like so in my experience, like many times I try to work with trauma is also like escape, it's most like kind of escaping from it, not like working through it. And so I guess like CFA was more like creatively trying to work through this trauma, but there's also other practices in my life when I'm like, oh, I'm like drinking or like other things which are not productive because at all, and it's to get eventually more worse. Yeah, so
Is it a creative process for your drinking?
no, drinking is not great. So there's like one part is creative, another part like more unproductive. Same. Yeah.
You're all 21, right?
No, people don't need to drink, and it's not the point to just.
I'm kidding.
I'm not suggesting food waste. I don't know why this.
It sounded like what you were saying is that you heard people describe various creative approaches to.
Yeah, good
navigate.
approach, like productive approach.
Yeah.
But whereas like for me, I felt like there's elements of my life that have this productive and like good approach, but then there's elements of my life that have this unproductive bad approach, which I try to deal with.
Yeah.
By doing something great.
Balance.
Don't drink. It doesn't help.
Well, thank you for joining us. About that time. Yeah, that concludes brief Sesh 4.
Thank you.
Feel free to enjoy more borscht. We've got an hour left of class.